All right, so one thing on my NSX that's kind of bugged me, not hugely, but kind of wanted to eventually change it out, was, as you can see, my speedometer is in miles per hour as a predominant unit, and that's because this is a original US car. Being in Canada, I mean, it's not the worst to have this because there are the small indications for kilometers, etc. But I figured it'd be kind of nice just to make that the actual predominant one. So what we're going to do first is take out the instrument cluster. So I'll kind of show you how to do that. So the first thing we're going to do underneath the car, there's a foot, like kind of a kick panel underneath where your pedals are. There's two Phillips head screws on either side, so we're going to go ahead and remove those to take that panel out. Okay, so with the screws removed on either side, that's going to kind of come down here. Next, there's going to be a couple screws just on the bottom portion of this interior trim panel that's underneath the steering wheel. So we're going to remove those, and then I believe this is held on with clips at the top, so it should just be able to slide out after that. Next thing we're going to do is going to remove the lower portion of the tilt cover. So it's held on with 3 screws, and then also there's 2, these are more like screws slash bolts. Here they have a Phillips head on them, but I feel like whenever it's kind of a bolt, it's easier just to get the actual proper size socket on there, and those are 8mm, so we're going to remove all those next. So for the panel that was actually here, so there were the 2 bolts on the left hand side. On the right hand side, mine were also held in with 2 Phillips head screwdrivers, so did that and removed that entire section. So then now we have the tilt cover lowered as well. Okay, now with those off, we're going to go ahead and just remove the screws that hold in the actual instrument cluster itself. So there's 2 screws on the top here, 2 on either side as well, just on the bottom connecting piece. And once we're done that, we can move on to the next step. All right, so in terms of which screws to remove, if you look at the cluster itself, it should be pretty self-explanatory, but for those that aren't, because there's screws that actually hold the plastic onto the instrument cluster, so you don't want to remove those. We can get to that later, but basically there's 2 screws on the top, 1 on either corner, and it's kind of connected to a metal bracket. And then on either side, where there's the white portion, that's where some of the connectors are, there's a screw on either side there. So once you remove those, then we can kind of similarly to the instrument cluster surround, there's plugs that plug into either side of the cluster, so we're going to go ahead and unplug those before we actually remove the whole entire assembly. Okay, now you have your instrument cluster inside. What you're going to want to do is remove your light. So you just have to twist this, move that out of the way, and then we're going to want to remove all these screws that are basically holding the back of the circuitry board to the instrument cluster itself. All right, so here you can see we have the cover off. So there's a little tab here, just in the middle of the screen. That's where the wires for the actual light plug goes through. So you want to get that out of the way. And then you just want to work your way around. So as you can see, don't take off all the ones that are actually on the circuit board itself, but you want to remove these screws that are kind of along the outside of the bezel. And then there's tabs, basically one here, one here, one here, and then one here. I found it easiest just to remove the ones on the bottom, and then it can kind of slide out. So once we have this apart, this is basically 2 separate pieces now, and there's a connector here in the middle, so we just want to disconnect that, and then this should all be able to pop off now. Okay, so I have the 2 circuit boards basically removed right now. So what you want to do is basically where any of these circles are, that's where there's these little pieces of hardware with washers on them. So you're going to remove all of those. There's a center connector that holds the 2 halves together. You want to unplug that. And then on this side, you'll see there's a connector there and a connector there, which correspond to here and here. So what you want to do is just take those off. I found it easiest just to use a small little flathead screwdriver to kind of pry that off. It's pretty tight in there for fingers. But yeah, so that's removal of the circuit boards. So now we're going to go ahead and remove these brackets. They're just held on by screws basically at the back of the cluster and then on the front as well. So once you remove that, you can put that aside. And then the actual backing section is just held in with a few clips. So one at the top, and then one on either side. So we'll go ahead and take those out, and then we can slide the entire assembly out. So one last thing before we actually get to separating the actual face off of the instrument cluster is just on the front side here. There's 4 screws on the bottom. You'll want to remove those, and now we should be able to take this apart. So while we're doing this work, I figured I would actually change out some of the bulbs on the actual instrument cluster itself. So there's three main ones that provide the illumination. So there's one here, and one here. So pretty simple. For some reason, so these are a 158 bulb. These were pretty hard to find for me locally. So I don't know if you'll have this issue. There are a lot of examples of like LEDs on Amazon and stuff like that, but I believe most of them don't function with the dimming feature. So I just wanted to get good old Sylvana long life bulbs. But yeah, this 158, super hard to find for some reason. So hopefully you don't run into that issue. Okay, and as you can see, now we have the speedometer. This is a JDM speedometer, so it's in kilometers. There's actually no mile per hour marker. Would only really be an issue if I was going to the States, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem. So this is in now. For some reason, my tachometer keeps on spinning, so I just need to probably wiggle that around so it readjusts and everything. But yeah, this would be another good opportunity to replace your actual instrument cluster cover if yours is pretty scratched up. Mine isn't terrible. It's not mint, but it's not bad enough that it bothers me, so I'm gonna leave that as is, and we're just gonna go throw this in the car now. Okay, so as you can see, we got the dash basically fully back into the car now and everything reassembled. One of the things I just want to mention, if on the previous clip you would have seen that my tachometer needle was kind of spun all the way around, it does not reset. So I had to basically take the housing apart again and then just remove that dial. That one was not too bad because you just have to remove the bottom screws and then remove the clips on the side and then at the very top, and then the whole entire cover piece comes out, and then you can just spin the dial back manually. But yeah, so went ahead, connected everything back up. I'm glad I replaced the dash lights because as you can see, my dash is now fully lit. Before, one of the bulbs was actually burnt out, so it was a little bit dark on one side. But yeah, in terms of tips of putting everything back together, it's pretty much the exact opposite. One thing I want to mention is the metal bracket on the instrument cluster where it attaches to the top of the dash. There's kind of a metal clip on either side. I accidentally bumped the one on the left and it fell down, and it took me a while to find it. So make sure that you're not bumping into those. Otherwise, it's pretty much just the reversal process. There are a lot of different types of screws that hold everything back together, but as long as you kind of remember where everything goes, for the most part, they're kind of just the short black self-tapping screws and a couple of non-self-tappers that go into where the electrical connections are. But other than that, fairly straightforward. Not too terrible of a job. Again, like I mentioned before, if you have your factory steering wheel in place, that would be a lot tougher. But because I have an aftermarket one, I had mine removed just to make sure that I had enough clearance. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video and gives you a little bit more insight on how to put this all back together. Whether you need to change, I guess, anything in your instrument cluster. I know a lot of guys, they'll change out the dials to the Type R dials, or sometimes your odometer is stuck, so that needs to be replaced. But yeah, so you can kind of use this video for anything that you need to replace on the instrument cluster itself. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and hopefully look forward to more NSX content.